So we're going to talk about fear today. Um, I did kind of want to do this topic because of it being so close to Halloween. As you know, there's different kinds of fear, right? There's the fun, spooky fear, and then there's the real life fear that we can feel when we're approaching heavy tasks, uncertainty. Um, so we're going to kind of talk about that, like, actual real fear, not the spooky kind of fear. Um, So our agenda today is we're going to define fear. What is it? Um, we're going to talk about fear versus anxiety. How are they the same and how are they different? We're going to talk briefly about some common caregiver fears. We're going to talk about facing your fears, and then we're going to talk about the empowered caregiver. So I think it's good to define what fear is. And if you've been to any of my trainings, you know I like to talk about the brain and how emotions affect the brain. Just because from my perspective, I've found it a lot easier to overcome mental challenges, emotional barriers by understanding them, why they exist, and how they can actually be helpful. And it helps me to take control. And so that's why I think it's important to explain what fear is and how it affects the brain. And then common caregiver fears, I think it's good to have that solidarity to understand that maybe the things that we're feeling are not just in our minds, that a lot of us experience those things. And then, of course, giving you tips on how to overcome those fears is the whole point of this training, right? So let's go ahead and get into it. What is fear? So fear is a response in your body's natural warning system. We all have base emotions that we cannot control, and fear is one of them. So when you're physically or psychologically under threat, different areas of the brain will immediately activate and communicate with one another. Again, remember, fear is a natural survival response that we have. So this fear or this response is referred to as fear conditioning, and it consists of 3 distinct steps. So you receive a sensory message with potentially dangerous output. So an example would be, you see a bear in the woods, right? So you're receiving that sensory information. You record the experience into your memory because your brain is going to make note of this, how you survived and how to avoid those things in the future. And then third, you're going to initiate a defense response. And so this whole breakdown is basically just, hey, you're scared, and your brain it kicks into action. How are we going to prepare to defend ourselves from this fear, from this threat that we're experiencing? So here's my little brain. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but just kind of to give you an idea of how this works biologically in your body. So the amygdala is the first responder in your brain, and this is located just in front of the hippocampus. The amygdala is basically like our emotional center in our brain. So it controls decision making, emotional memories. It helps us to regulate our behavior, and this is what initiates our fear response. So if you hear people talking about maybe generalized anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, these all stem from an overactive amygdala. Okay, so the amygdala activation is the first step of our fight or flight response. Many of you guys have probably heard that term, fight or flight. They also added another one, which is freeze, which we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But it activates, that first step of activation sends messages to your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that regulates your fear response based on your previous experiences. So remember, I was telling you before, you get that initial stimulation, and then your brain starts to remember that. So this is like your previous experiences will kind of map out your fear response. And then dopamine emitted from that prefrontal cortex will determine how you process your learned information, including memory, attention, the inhibition of impulses, and your cognitive flexibility. So that's just how are you going to think your way out of this. And in neuroscience, that's the part of the brain that dictates post-traumatic stress disorder and other anxiety disorders. And so the conversation between the different parts of your brain, your nervous system releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and that tells your body to stick around and fight, or it'll tell you to run away from a dangerous situation. So just to use an example, if you were in a car wreck, right? Your brain remembers that trauma, right? Your brain remembers that danger, that your brain will record that fear so that next time you're in a car, it can alert you to potential danger. Okay, so this is kind of where phobias come from and anxiety triggers come from. So if you haven't dealt with that fear that you felt in that initial experience, it can continue to creep up because your brain is starting to notice patterns or create patterns to keep you safe. Okay. And again, I want to explain this to you so that way when we feel those fear feelings, when we feel that anxiety, we can appreciate what our body's trying to do for us. Okay, these systems are set up not to make our lives miserable, but to actually help us survive. And it's just one of those things that once you're aware of it, it's a lot easier to understand that your body really is not fighting against you. It's definitely trying to help you. It's just, maybe not doing it in the way that is actually helpful. so so that's why I explain all that brain stuff. Plus I'm a total dork and it fascinates me, so I have to put it in there. Okay, so now we're going to talk about anxiety versus fear. What's the difference? So we often use those words interchangeably, right? But they're not the same. It's not that they don't share symptoms, and they do kind of stem from the same thing, but it is important to know the difference between anxiety and fear. So fear is one of our 7 core emotions, and those are emotions that we just are reactive, right? We can't control the feelings that we feel. We can just control our response to them. So the biological and evolutionary purpose of core emotions like fear is to help us to survive. So fear specifically makes us flee from danger. Anxiety is an inhibitory emotion, and this results from avoiding core emotions and needs. So anxiety results from the physical effort to push down emotions. If we know we're not in physical danger in that moment, yet we're experiencing something like fear, we can assume we're experiencing anxiety. So you can kind of think of it this way. Fear is something that you can't control, it just happens. And anxiety is our response to try and control the things that we can't control. Okay. And so it doesn't actually rid our bodies or our minds of the feeling. It just kind of blankets it, and it's still under the surface simmering, which is why you may have this constant background feeling of fear. That's what anxiety is. Okay. So we're going to talk about our fear response and how it affects our bodies, the fight, flight, or freeze response. So fear isn't something that happens only in our minds, right? It's a process that also occurs within our bodies. In order to survive, human beings and other animals, we evolved a fight, flight, or freeze response to stress. And so this will either lead us to combat or to run away from frightening encounters. So in fight or flight mode, our heart rate will increase, we breathe faster, our senses become heightened, blood will flow away from our heart and our digestive system into our limbs, and this is going to allow us to react to danger at hand. So if you've got blood flowing into your limbs, you're going to be able to run faster, or you're going to be able to fight, right? You're going to be able to punch, kick, whatever you need to do. In freeze mode, that's a different mechanism. So our heart rate will decrease instead of increase, and we become immobile. Freeze mode can have a protective function. If you think about in the natural world, a lot of animals will play dead when they're under threat. But in humans, freezing can actually prevent us from defending ourselves and articulating our needs. So when our fear is, our senses register a fearful or stressful situation, that amygdala shows back up again. It engages our sympathetic nervous system, which is kind of our emotional brain. And this cues the endocrine system to release stress hormones. So when the amygdala is firing up, the cerebral cortex, that's the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and judgment, will actually shut down. So that makes it very challenging for us to make good decisions when we are faced with fear or in stressful situations. So I'm sure many of you have experienced brain fog, right? Or maybe you're just kind of frozen in place where you know you have A, B, and C to do, but you just can't get to A, B, and C. This could potentially be a fight, flight, or freeze response, or a freeze response due to that chronic anxiety you're feeling, that tampered down fear that you're feeling, okay? Where you're just kind of immobilized, you're not sure what to do next. And so as far as anxiety is concerned, when we experience anxiety, our sympathetic nervous system responds in a very similar way as it does to fear. But with anxiety, it's engaged at a lower and a more constant level. So it's kind of like you're steeping tea, right? You're kind of just sitting in that all the time. So instead of preparing for an immediate threat, you're on edge, right? For prolonged periods of time. Your muscles become tense, you become cautious, vigilant maybe for possible threats, and we may avoid situations and attempt to dodge danger, okay? Just the right amount of fear can be healthy, and a certain degree of anxiety can help us sense danger and conquer challenges. However, if we're feeling that constantly, if it's too much anxiety, you can spend an excessive amount of time feeling distressed, right? Racing thoughts preventing you from concentrating, worries about the future and the past, that can prevent you from living in the moment. And as this is in regards to caregiving, maybe you had a scare, right, with your loved one. Maybe something happened with the medication, or maybe they fell, or maybe they choked, or something happened where you felt an enormous fear for their safety. And that memory of that moment, that memory of that fear, can still stay in our system as anxiety in the background, anxiety and fear, and it can affect how we are providing care for our loved ones, right? I'm afraid to move them because last time I did, they fell. I'm afraid to give them the medications because last time I did, I mixed them up, right? So these are just kind of patterns that our brain recognizes in order to protect us from something that we perceive as dangerous. So that's where the anxiety and that chronic anxiety, that chronic fear starts to come from in a caregiving situation. So all of our emotions are physical in nature, okay? So as a result, we can sense them in our bodies. If we slow down and notice what happens below the neck during fear or anxiety, we'll eventually notice a variety of physical sensations and changes. So we'll talk about that very briefly here. So physical manifestations of fear: rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, sweating, trembling, chills, dry mouth, nausea even. Physical and psychological signs of anxiety: feeling nervous, restless, or tense, having a sense of doom, increased heart rate, shortness of breath, sweating, dizziness, ear ringing, trouble concentrating, trouble sleeping, gastrointestinal distress, having difficulty controlling your worry or ruminating, having the urge to avoid things that trigger your anxiety, and feeling insecure. So obviously there's some overlap here, right, between fear and anxiety. That's why it's really hard to discern what's what, okay? So for the rest of this presentation, I will use the word fear and anxiety interchangeably, because now we understand that anxiety stems from fear. It's all part of that same core emotion, okay? It's just that fear is more of a response to a direct threat, and anxiety is a consistent response or consistent feeling of anticipated threat. Okay, but they're kind of the same. So here are some common caregiver fears. How bad is it going to get? Right? The unknown can be very frightening. How long is this going to last? How much is it going to cost? Right? Caregiving is not cheap or easy. What will happen if our loved one's condition worsens and you can't care for them anymore, or you can't care for yourself? Finding help or having to move out of our homes. A lot of times, if you have maybe an aging parent you're taking care of, you have to move out of your home and move in with them. That can be very stressful. That can be very anxiety inducing. What will life be like when our loved one passes? What if you pass before they do, right? That's a big fear, especially if you're taking care of children, right? And what if care mistakes are made and I harm my loved one, right? So there's just some common fears. And a lot of these are very valid, right? These, you kind of have to be self-aware and know that, not all of these fears are just coming out of nowhere. And so being aware of what you're afraid of and even preparing for worst case scenario can do wonders for alleviating that background anxiety, right? Because if the worst case scenario happens, at least you're prepared, okay? Preparation can do wonders for reducing fear in our everyday lives. So this is a quote from Pamela D. Wilson. She is a caregiving expert. She is a caregiving advocate. She, I believe, has a doctorate's degree. I'm not sure exactly, but her website has a lot of wonderful information. So I just wanted to share this with you. She says that fear of making caregiving mistakes can paralyze caregivers. Taking action to make caregiving decisions fails to happen when the fear of making a mistake is greater than the fear of success. It's kind of weird to think about fearing success, right? But sometimes we do. Fear is created in our brain and it is supported by previous failures. There are many reasons fear occurs in caregiving. There are also many side effects of fear that include feelings of anger, resentment, and bitterness that increase your stress. Fear piled on top of negative feelings reduces the motivation to act. Okay, so it's kind of like engaging that freeze mode. Caregiving burnout contributes to fear of making caregiving mistakes. At a high level of caregiver stress, the brain shuts down and closes the door to decision making, which is viewed to have more risk than benefit. Opportunities to improve a situation or to receive help are also quickly dismissed by the burnt out caregiving brain. The result is paralysis to engage in any activity viewed as threatening that may have a positive result. So if you can think back in your caregiving experience, are there any times where you felt like you knew what you had to do, but because maybe it didn't turn out the way you thought it would or the way that it should have in the past, you're hesitant, right? You're afraid to go forward and do it again, okay? That's not uncommon. And just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean that you cannot learn from those past mistakes and improve your caregiving, okay? So the best way to alleviate fear is to face it, right? We learn about that when we're kids, be brave, be courageous, right? Face your fears and you realize they're not that bad, right? So I did hear a quote a long time ago, and I can't even tell you where I heard it or who said it. But and now it totally just escaped my brain. Good Lord. It was there and now it's gone. Oh, that courage is not the absence of fear. It's being afraid and doing it anyway. Okay. So we can't do anything about our fear as far as when we experience it, right? We cannot control feeling afraid, but we can control how we respond to it. And doing what we need to do in spite of our fear is what courage is. And so I hope I'm inspiring you to be a little courageous here. And facing your fears can be scary, right? So the first step is learning about your fear, right? That could be the hardest one, but it's absolutely necessary. You can't overcome a fear that remains hidden in the dusty regions of your subconscious, right? You have to face it. So when you turn your face towards a person, you see that person and you learn what they look like and how they're acting. And when you turn towards your fear rather than away from it, you'll notice things about your fear that you didn't know before, right? So that awareness will help you to overcome it. So to help you face your fears and anxiety, you try keeping a journal over a period of a couple weeks. So you can record any patterns you notice. Like, do you experience more symptoms of anxiety or fear in the morning? Do you experience it more in the evening? What do you tend to do when your fears arise? So you jot down anything that you think is significant. And the reason why this works is because you're transferring your fear patterns and your symptoms into writing, and it helps to kind of demystify them, right? You're shining a light on them. And so they don't seem as big and insurmountable. So most importantly, learning all about your fear, it gives you an idea of how to counter it. So I'll tell you a personal story of mine. I have a phobia, and it's called ichthyophobia. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's the fear of fish, right? So I would be one of those people. I never went into the swimming pool or into the ocean. I never went to the aquarium. Some grocery stores would have like goldfish, and I just couldn't even be around them. And a phobia is an irrational fear, right? I don't know where it came from or how, it decided to just kind of latch on to me, but it did. And so I consistently exposed myself to what I was afraid of. in order to demystify that fear, right? It didn't seem so big and so scary once I got comfortable with it. So that's just a personal story, that this does actually help. Okay, sitting with your fear, analyzing your fear, trying to figure out where it's coming from, what's triggering it, it makes a huge difference in the brain. So step 2, you can use your imagination in positive ways. So an imagination's a wonderful thing. It gives you power, creativity, the ability to think outside the box, but unfortunately, an active imagination can also be harmful when it causes you to think about the negative things, right? Because you can imagine all sorts of terrible things, magnifying your fear, making it seem so much worse than it actually is. So we're going to encourage you to use your imagination in the opposite way. Think about it in positive ways, okay? So instead of letting your imagination lead you down that dark corridor of fear, purposely use it for overcoming fear. So you can do this by picking a calm moment where you feel relaxed and maybe not as anxious. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in a situation that normally causes fear, okay? Now, imagine yourself handling that situation peacefully, handling it well, handling it expertly. That peace that you experience in your imagined scenario can actually help you get through the actual ordeal more peacefully. It's very, very easy to trick our brains, okay? And this is kind of what we're doing. We're kind of letting our brains have the experience of peace. And so it can make a memory of that. So that way, next time you're faced with that fear-inducing or that anxiety-inducing situation, your brain almost has that memory of the imagined scenario. It's wild, but it works. The next step, use your brain in a different way than usual. So your fear and your anxiety arise out of a certain part in your brain, which we talked about earlier, and they allow emotion to overcome your rational thinking. In fact, your rational thinking might just completely shut down if you've been experiencing anxiety over a long period of time. So when you feel a fearful symptom coming forth, try to use a different part of your brain, right? So think about numbers, for instance. A nurse in a clinic might ask you to rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Well, you can also use something like that to rate your anxiety. So how anxious are you when 1 is perfectly calm and 10 is your very worst symptom? So stop and analyze, right? Is your fear rated at a 7? Okay, great. Now you know where you are, and you can work on lowering that to a 4 or a 3. Okay. And I know it's easy to catastrophize. Okay. And so having little tools like this can help you kind of pump the brakes on that fear response in your brain so it doesn't kind of overwhelm you and get you to that catastrophizing rumination in your brain. Another tip, focus on your breathing. So it's really more important than you think. Usually anxiety will begin with short breaths, and the short breaths cause a number of negative reactions in your body, which could quickly become an anxiety attack. So the key to overcoming those fast outbreaks of anxiety is to control your breathing. So if you think about it, your brain kicks in this fight, flight, or freeze. You start to breathe shallow. You're preparing for fight. You're preparing to run. Forcing your body to slow down and take those long breaths, it actually kind of resets that, if that makes sense. It just kind of stops it in the track. So it's not very complicated. So once you start to recognize that you're becoming fearful, just stop and focus on your breathing. Take a breath in and slowly let it out. Make sure that your exhale is longer than your inhale. This is, it's not just a trick that, psychological trick. Deep breathing actually forces your body to physically calm itself. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to combat that biological survival instinct in our bodies. We're letting it know it's okay, right? We're calm. We're going to be chill. We're not going to freak out. Next, practicing mindfulness. Mindfulness is a passive thinking activity that allows you to become more aware of your fear. Again, awareness is key, right? And as we learned before, awareness will help you overcome fear and anxiety, right? You kind of call the boogeyman out. You pull off the mask. You turn the light on. You realize that it's not the threat you thought it was. So during a less severe time of fear and anxiety, obviously, if you're having a panic attack, you might not be thinking about practicing mindfulness. But if you're having those, maybe like a less severe feeling of fear and anxiety, and you recognize those fear symptoms rising up, just kind of sit down and think about what's happening to you, right? It's kind of like making a mental journal entry. Observe your symptoms. Don't do anything about it. Just sit and keep track of yourself as the moment continues. Being passive will raise your self-awareness, and it prevents you from doing the typical things you do when you experience fear. So it can help you get out of a rut. So if you're experiencing fear or anxiety and you're maybe paralyzed by that, you're not really sure what to do, um, and or maybe maybe your habit is to shut down, maybe your habit is to distract yourself, maybe your habit is to lash out. Okay, you're kind of in that reactive rut. Practicing mindfulness and just sitting and taking inventory can kind of help you create different patterns in your brain, right? Different grooves, different trails to follow in your brain. Next, talking to a therapist is a wonderful way to work through your fears and anxiety. However, you can't always be at your therapist's office, or maybe you don't have a therapist. So you can use nature as your therapist. Going for a walk outside, finding natural beauty in your backyard or in a park or wherever something green is growing, it does have an amazing effect on your biology, and it reduces symptoms of fear and anxiety. It's very well known that nature will calm people. Okay, it reduces your stress levels, and the changing mood changes your mood from being anxious to relaxed. Okay, and actually, the physical activity of walking or jogging outside, it does require us to use our brain different, which can switch us from that irrational, fearful thought pattern to clearer thinking, so we can overcome the fear. Okay, again, you're kind of engaging your brain in a different way so that it's not stuck in that fear response. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, next one. So, oh, actually, this slide's in the wrong spot, so we'll do this one here. Okay. So now we're going to talk about being the empowered caregiver. So acknowledging our fear, realizing that it's just part of our protective system in our bodies, can help to lessen the experience when it comes up. But I am a firm believer in positive self-talk. I think the way we speak not only affects the people around us, but it also affects the way we feel about ourselves. And again, it's kind of one of those little mental tricks where we trick our brain, where we're so prone to noticing the negative that we overlook the positive. And so using words to speak life into ourselves, it gives our brains something else to kind of chew on, right? It gives us something to notice. It signals to our brain, this is the pattern I want you to start looking for. Okay. So as an empowered caregiver, if you are feeling that anxiety or that fear creep up on you to where you feel like, I can't do this, I'm not sure what's going to happen, the unknown is overwhelming, start speaking life into yourself. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of these, but here's just a few affirmations that can be helpful. So take what you want, right? You don't have to do all of these. Some of these might not hit you the way others do, and that's okay. These are just some options, and there's a ton of these online, and you can even just come up with your own. Just keep them positive and try to use I am statements, not I am not. Okay, so I can handle anything that comes my way, right? My setbacks make me stronger. I'm capable. My confidence continues to grow. I'm doing the best that I can. And I think it's important to have affirmations in there that acknowledge where you are while giving space for where you're going. Okay, so if you say, my confidence continues to grow, it might be a little easier to believe that than if you say, I'm confident and unshakable, right? Because you might not be there yet, and that's okay. So, it can be whatever makes you feel the most empowered. Another one, I can find inner peace that I need. I have the skills to find solutions. Okay, give yourself credit. You've been doing this a while, right? Yeah, maybe you've made some mistakes, but how many days have you gone where you didn't make mistakes? How many days did you work through this and everything turned out well? Okay, how many times have you been successful? Our brains don't like to think about those because it's always looking for ways to protect us. So it's always looking for the negative, it's always looking for the threat. Okay, it's kind of like, thank you, brain, but no thanks. Okay, we can think of a better way to communicate with ourselves. And so these affirmations can give you a better, or at least, maybe be a starting point to how you can start to be more gentle and more positive in your self-talk. So affirmations for fear are proven to help you build confidence and calm your nerves when uncertainty strikes. It may take time and practice before you see results, so persistence is vital. Eventually, you'll find yourself in a better mental space and be able to tackle your fears head on. Okay. So again, it's not a magic pill. It's not a quick fix. You have to be intentional when you're retraining your brain to react to situations. You have to give it other options. And so that's what these kind of can help you to find those other options. So here are some self-statements that I thought were very interesting. So I wanted to add these in. Again, you take what resonates with you. It doesn't have to be all of these. But I just thought they would be useful, so I added them in here. Taking care of myself is necessary if I'm to give care to others. I know my limitations and my strengths, and I seek help when I need it. I have the right to feel what I feel and express those feelings in a calm manner. I maintain the right to my own life outside of caregiving. I think this is important when we think about fear, right? How many times have you not taken care of yourself, or have you not had a life outside of caregiving because you were afraid of what was going to happen while you weren't around, or you were afraid of what people were going to think, right? A lot of our behaviors, if we really stop and think about it and trace them back, can be rooted in our fears of other people's perceptions, or even our own expectations maybe not being met, okay? So it's important to give ourselves permission to live a life outside of caregiving. I have the right of choice to decide what I will or will not do. This also includes the right to not be manipulated by anger, fear, or guilt. And we can manipulate ourselves and not even realize we're doing it, right? So hopefully this kind of helps you to kind of like unstick the stuck, if that makes any sense. So that's all the information I have for you on fear. I know that was kind of quick, but I just really kind of wanted to give you an overview so that you can start to kind of really dissect this for yourselves. I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Because not everybody's fear is the same. We don't have the same fears. We might have similar fears. We can understand fears, but I think it's important to really sit with ourselves and try to figure out what's motivating this fear, what's motivating this anxiety, and you can start to unravel that. And I'm not a licensed therapist, but I'm working on getting my license, and so a lot of that therapy is just really about sitting with yourself, digging into your own past, digging into your learned responses, and finding better ways to live, to respond, to react that work for you, because not everybody's going to have the same solution. So I would like to open this up a little bit and see if you all have any questions, any insights, any reactions. I'd love to hear your feedback, or if anybody just has anything they want to talk about, and see if we can find some commonalities, some solidarity in a group here. Yeah, Lolita, you're raising your hand. You can just go ahead and unmute and talk.
Oh, sure. Good morning. This was really good information for me, Jenny. And I'm really glad that I was sent the email and was able to come in, because this was right on point for me. Wow. It was pretty direct, and you gave useful, you gave real life situations and circumstances, and also you offered some options that I could use. So thanks.
I love hearing that. Thank you so much, Lolita. I try to pull from my own experience, and I made a determination a long time ago that I wasn't going to live consumed by fear. And 20 years later, I start to feel that a little more empowered and courageous. And so I'm glad that I can share that with you, and you can also find use in the information. Does anybody else have anything they want to add or share before we close today?
Is there really a difference? This is Shirley. Good morning, everybody. Of fear and anger?
That's a really good question. I don't know if there's a difference. I mean, the way I see anger, okay, anger is what you see on stage, right? And it's the result of all these other behind the scenes feelings. And if you start really digging, you can find out that a lot of our quote unquote negative feelings like anger, resentment, they all really do stem from fear. Okay, fear is a very powerful core emotion. And so if you're feeling anger, I would say maybe step back and say, well, why am I feeling so angry? So I'll give you an example from my own life. Okay. I grew up in a very shame-based parenting style. Okay. There wasn't discipline. There was just a lot of shame. And there was a lot of shame surrounding our home and the way it was maintained. So as an adult, when I grew up and I had children of my own and they inevitably made messes, I would get angry, right? And the anger really was about a fear of how was I being perceived as a mother, right? Because in my world, if your house is dirty, you're a rotten mom. So my fear spurred an anger because what I was trying to do, I was trying to protect myself from feeling that shame by being on the defense, right? By being aggressive and acting out. So I'm not sure if that gives you a good idea, like an image of how anger and fear can be interconnected. But that's kind of where that's a little bit that I found out about myself by doing these introspective meditations and thinking like, am I really angry or am I just afraid of what I look like to other people? Am I really angry or am I just afraid that I'm not meeting my own expectations? So once I worked through that, the anger fell away.
Okay. So I guess some of those same strategies that you shared, you can definitely use it in the same situation when anger arises.
Yeah, and I think it's important to not be afraid of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
I think when we have these feelings where we start to feel guilty or we feel ashamed, like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't feel angry. I shouldn't feel afraid, right? Shame lives in should, right? That's where shame is bred. And so if we can just be comfortable with being honest with ourselves, we can discover so much more, not only about what we perceive as our weaknesses, but also we can start to discover our strengths as well.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are you having a morning, Shirley?
I'm having a morning. I'm having a morning. I mean,
Tuesday is Tuesday.
You just don't know what to do. You don't know what to do. You don't know what to do.
Well, and of course, I don't know your details, but sometimes there's nothing you can do but accept and release, right? Accept what is. Yeah. So Lolita asked if the information was going to be available later. Yes. So we do post our education online on our website, alabamarespite.org. I will put that in the chat if I can spell it. Hold on. .org. Okay. And we typically try to have those posted within 24 hours. So if you don't see it later on today, check back tomorrow and it should be on there. So yeah, and of course, just a last little housekeeping here. If you have yet to do so, please put your email address in the chat. This is an education stipend opportunity. So if you don't put the email address in the chat, I can't send you the survey, which means you can't get your education stipend. So make sure you put that in there. I really appreciate your time. I love seeing new people come into my groups, and I love seeing the familiar faces as well. But it is encouraging when you guys continue to show up. It makes me feel as though I am giving you what you need, and hopefully I can continue to do so. So keep those suggestions coming. If you haven't signed up for anything, oh wait, no, this is the last one for the month. So I'm working on next month's education. I do have a professional coming in from Expect Care to kind of demystify hospice and talk to you guys about some resources that are available to you. I know hospice is kind of a buzzword that people don't like to hear, but hopefully it'll help eliminate some fear about hospice. And I'm also going to do a deeper dive into positive self-talk, positive affirmations, why they help and how you can use them. And I haven't quite figured out the other two that I'm going to do, but they're coming down the line. So if you want to register for any of the upcoming trainings, please do so on the website. If you're not getting our newsletter, you can also sign up for that, and that will have all of our events listed there as well. And I really hope you all are enjoying this beautiful weather. Getting sun on your face and fresh air, it does wonders for our brains. It does wonders for stress. So I hope you're taking advantage of that before the dark and the cold come upon us.
You have a conference coming up on the 2nd in Tuscaloosa.
Yes.
Can anybody in the area attend since I'm in Birmingham?
Yes, those are open for everybody. In fact, I will be doing 2 presentations that day. I'll be talking about just different ways to alleviate stress. And then I'll also be giving the suicide prevention training that I have done previously online. But if you missed it and you want to come in person, I'll be there doing that. And then also on the 17th of November, there is a Caregiver College in Huntsville, where I will be also presenting 2 trainings that day too. So if you are local and you want to join, please show up, register, so you can get all the goodie bags that we have available for you. And so we know to prepare for however many people are coming. So yes, thanks for bringing that up, Shirley.
Thank you.
All right, well, if there's nothing more, I will wish you all the best for the day. I wish you the light and the love that you give to everyone, that you will turn it on yourself. And y'all just have an ecstatic afternoon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great session today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Bye.
Enjoy yours. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.